So for the sake of relevance, I'm going to finish this off part two, but I only needed one more section to go, so I'm just going to go over the recount for these last segmented portion of William Paley's um, on the duty of submission to civil government. The final portion of book three. I'm sorry, book 5, chapter 3. We proceed to point out some easy but important inferences which result from the substitution of public expediency into place of all implied compacts, promises, or conventions whatsoever. 1. It may be as much a duty at one time to resist government as it is at another to obey it. To wit, whenever more advantage will, in our opinion, occur to the community from resistance than mischief. 2. The lawfulness of resistance or the lawfulness of revolt does not depend alone upon the grievances which is sustained or feared, but also upon the probable expense and event of the contest. They who concerted the revolution in England were justifiable in their counsels because, from the apparent disposition of the nation and the strength of the character of the parties engaged, the measure was likely to be brought about with little mischief or bloodshed, whereas it might have been a question if many friends of their country, whether the injuries then endured and threatened would have authorized the renewal of a doubtful civil war. 3. Irregularity is irregularity inherent first foundation of a test or a subsequent violence, fraud, or injustice in getting possessions of the supreme power are not sufficient reasons for resistance after the government is once peaceably settled. No subject of the British Empire conceives himself engaged to vindicate the justice of the Norman claim or conquest, or apprehends that his duty in any manner depends upon that controversy. So likewise in the house of Lancaster or in the posterity of Cromwell had been at this day seated upon the throne of England, we should have been as little concerned to inquire how the founder of the family came there. No civil contest so futile, although none have been so furious and sanguinary as those which are excited by a disputed secession. 4. Not every invasion of the subjects' rights or liberty or the Constitution, not even breach of promise or of oath, not every stretch of prerogative, abuse of power, or neglect of duty by the chief magistrate or by the whole or any branch of the legislative body justifies resistance unless these crimes draw after the public consequences of sufficient magnitude to outweigh the evils of civil disturbance. Nevertheless, every violation of the Constitution ought to be watched with jealousy and resented as such, beyond what the quality of estimable damage would require or warrant, because a known and settled usage of governing affords the only security against the enormities of uncontrolled dominion, and because this security is weakened by every encroachment which is made without opposition or opposed without effect. 5. No usage, law, or authority whatsoever is so binding that it need or ought to be continued when it may be charged with advantage to the community. The family of the prince, the order of succession, the prerogative of the crown, the form and parts of the legislature, together with the respective powers, office, duration, and mutual dependency of the several parts, are all only so many laws, mutable like other laws, whenever expedience requires, either by the ordinary act of legislature or, if the occasion deserves it, by the interposition of the people. These points are wont to be approached with a kind of awe. They are represented to the mind as principles of the Constitution settled by your ancestors, and, being settled, to be no more committed to innovation or debate, as foundations never are to be stirred, as the terms and conditions of the social compact to which every citizen of the state has engaged his fidelity by virtue of a promise which he cannot now recall. Such reasons have no place in our system. To us, if there be any good reason for treating these with more deference and respect than other laws, it is either to the advantage of the present constitution of government, which reason must be of different force in different countries, or because in all countries it is important because of the importance that the form of usage of governing be acknowledged and understood, as well as the governors as the governed, and because the seldomer it is changed, the more perfectly it is to be known on both sides. 6, the final one. As all civil obligation is resolved into expediency, what, if may be asked, is the difference between the obligation of the Englishman and the Frenchman? Or why, since the obligation of both appears to be founded in the same reason, is a Frenchman bound to the conscience to bear anything from his king, which an Englishman would not be bound to bear? Their conditions may differ, but their rights, according to this account, should seem to be equal, and yet we are accustomed to speak of the rights as well as of the happiness of a free people, compared with what belonged to the subjects of absolute monarchies. How will you say can this comparison be explained unless we refer to the difference in the compacts by which they are respectively bound? This are a fair question, and the answer to it will afford a farther illustration of our principles. We admit then that there are many things that which a Frenchman is bound in conscience as well as by coercion to endure at the hands of his prince, to which an Englishman would not be obligated to submit. But we assert that it is for these two reasons alone: first, because the same act of the prince is not the same grievance, where it is agreeable to the Constitution and where it infringes it; secondly, because redress in the two cases is not equally attainable. Resistance cannot be attempted with equal hopes of success, or with the same prospect of receiving support from others, where the people are reconciled to their sufferings, as where they are alarmed by innovation. In this way, no otherwise, the subjects of different states possess different civil rights, and duties of obedience is defined by different boundaries, and the point of justifiable resistance placed at different parts of the scale of suffering, all which is sufficiently intelligible without a social compact. 7, the final one. Quote, the interest of the whole society is binding upon every part of it, close quote. No rule short of this will provide for the stability of civil government or for the peace and safety of social life. Wherefore, an individual member of the state are not permitted to pursue their private emolument to the prejudice of the community. So is it equally a consequence of this rule that no particular colony, province, town, or district can justly concert measures for their separate interests, which shall appear at the same time to dismiss the sum of the public prosperity. I do not mean that it is necessary to the justice of the measure that it profit each and every part of the community, for as the happiness of the whole may be increased whilst at some part is diminished, it is possible that the conduct of one part of an empire may be detrimental to some other part, and yet just, provided one part again more in happiness than the other part loses, so that the common weal be augmented by the change. But what I affirm is that those counsels can never be reconciled with the obligations resulting from civil union, which cause the whole happiness of the society to be impaired for the conveniency of a part. This conclusion is applicable to the question of right between Great Britain and her revolt colonies. Had I been an American, I should not have thought it enough to have had it even demonstrated that the separation from the parent state would produce effects beneficial to America. My relation to the state imposed upon me a further inquiry, namely, whether the whole happiness of the empire was likely to be promoted by such a measure, not indeed the happiness of every part. That was not necessary, nor to be expected, but whether what Great Britain would lose by the separation was likely to be compensated by the joint stock of happiness, by the advantages which America would receive from it, the consented claims of sovereign states and their remote dependencies may be submitted to the adjudication of this rule with mutual safety. A public advantage is measured by the advantage which each individual receives and by the number of those who receive it. A public evil is compounded by the same proportions. Whilst, therefore, a colony is small or a province tiny inhabited, if a competition of interest arise between the original country and their acquired dominions, the former ought to be preferred, because it is fit for that. If one must necessarily be sacrificed, the less give place to the greater. But when, by an increase of population, the interest of the province begins to bear a considerable portion of the entire interest of the community, it is possible that they may suffer so much by the subjection that not only theirs but the whole happiness of the empire may be obstructed by their union. The rule of principle of the calculation being still the same, the result is different, and this difference begets a new situation which entitles the subordinate parts of the states to more equal terms of confederation, and if these be refused, to independency. Okay, so the primary thing to understand, this is fascism. The concept of fascism is manifested in the symbol, exemplified by the symbol, is binding rods. The axe head on the fascia, which is the universal symbol of fascism that draws its roots from Rome, not Mussolini's Rome, but the ancient Roman Empire, represents the republic, essentially, the construct of Plato's republic. The leather straps, the rods, each represent a class or a segment of the society. The leather straps that bind them together represent the force or laws, or as in Machiavelli's The Prince talks about in later on here, is the force of arms, because you can't have a republic without a force of arms, and therefore the primary objective, the chief foundation of all states, whether new, old, or mixed, are good laws and good arms. And as there cannot be good laws where there are not good arms, and where there are good arms there must be good laws, I will now discuss the laws. I will now not discuss the laws, but will speak of the arms, because the arms is the primary thing. I think it's very important to note, this was written in 1788. This was written in England from an English guy. He is praising the American Revolution as a beneficial effect on the English Empire. He does not refrain from using the term empire. It should be noted that the Federal Reserve System that is now, people are very well aware, is actually a private corporation that has no association or obligation to what we consider the government of the United States, which supposedly under the context of a democracy is we the people. Therefore, the Federal Reserve openly declares that it has no allegiance to we the people. Does it have an allegiance to anyone? Well, the Federal Reserve is a subsidiary of the City of London, which is like the Vatican and like Washington, D.C., it's called a city-state. It's basically a massive corporation. And the City of London is considered the central bank of the Commonwealth. Australia and Canada's central bank, as you can see from the transition from not Jay Carney, from I forgot what his name is, but the guy that was head of the central bank in Canada is now the head of the central bank in the UK. The UK being a construct of 4 smaller states, that being Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England. England, still to this day, while equal with these 3, is not considered by the United Nations as a country. Ireland and Scotland, that doesn't need to take a deep look into history to understand the relationship between the Irish, the Scottish, and the English. The English, as much as they want to delineate themselves from the imperial Roman elite mentality, have never in any way, shape, or form settled for equality or peace with the general Celtic people, any more than the American, the descendants, they're only American, the European Americans or Canadians or Australians have ever extended any form of equality or friendship with their Aboriginal or Native or First Nation or whatever you want to call indigenous populations. Remember, the Celtic people, before the culture was erased, they were white Indians. They lived exactly like the Indian tribes on the plains for the most part, or even some of the Inuit tribes in the Canadian part. So and on another note, he's defending the American Constitution, okay, while saying, rather than, okay, it's 1788, okay, we just broke away from them. Oh, when we got our freedom. He is basically conveying in a massively Christian sense that is so powerful, such a powerful influence in America, that it stimulates Henry David Thoreau to write what ends up becoming literally way better than the Constitution, the most pivotal piece of American literature to ever be produced, and that is on the resistance to civil government, or better known as civil disobedience, or resistance to civil resistance to civil government, take your pick. It was a direct response to this writing, and I read the section. This is a book 5, chapter 3. This is the specific segment that Henry David Thoreau seeks to address in that writing. The writing that was the foundational inspiration for the entire women's liberation movement, the prohibition movement. Whether you like the effects or not, you gotta understand, whatever you think about prohibition, the truth be told, and I have studied this because my profession was bartending, and this was actually one of the contributing reasons why I left, because I still look at the movement, of prohibition as legitimate, in the sense, if not only in the sense that many women were raped, brutalized, beaten, and tortured towards the endeavor, and their sole motivation, while still highly race motivated, was to protect, I mean, the men too, but the children and themselves from the massive amounts of violence that will be perpetrated against them. And whether you like it or not, they used the same concept. Now, I'm not saying that they applied it exactly correctly, because in that context, all of them continue to not apply the most fundamental example that was provided in the essay, and that's to refrain from paying taxes. That is the black arrow to kill smog, the dragon, the beast. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Not everybody wants to get rid of civil government, because a lot of people are hardcore adherents to the ideology that's proposed by this. Later on in other segments that I'm going to put on as well, he gets very deep into the Bible, and there's even prominent American preachers today that are very much interested in promoting the biblical concept of subjugation to the civil government. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God. And they circled that around in a swastika, which is a whirlwind type effect, a vortex type effect, and in its essence, there becomes no distinction, because their final analysis is that to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and where he talks about the social contract, when you buy land, you're in the contract, and basically, but he goes, when render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and that's saying, if Caesar's the authority protecting you, or American government, or some form of republic government, because again, Caesar was the republic, so he was an element of it. Some of it, no, he wasn't a republic. The republic is the entire entity. The democracy, timocracy, aristocracy, oligarchy, or tyranny, which was the Caesar, each of those are only a single element. Just like I have a head, one arm, one leg, and one leg. But we would say that in essence, the part of me that is the republic is the part of me that is even deeper than my heart and even than brain, what we would consider the soul of it all, the spirit of it all, is the republic. And each of the elements function according to the nature of the republic, and the republic is a fascist construct. The note 2, that he makes it very clear, when you're forming a government, you can't take into consideration the needs and the desires of the savage, which are the conquered people, regardless of how they treated you. Remember, the only reason that we have a country here is because the first colonists survived. And the only reason they survived when they had landed at Plymouth Rock, barren, starving, without any shelter or no clue what to do. There's plenty of documentation to show too, because of the horrific water conditions in England that they came from, that they didn't even understand in their simpleton minds that they could drink the water here. So in that context, it was the Indians who approached them. It wasn't that the colonists found them. It was the Indians that saw them in that state. And as an act of human compassion and nobility, recognizing them as owing the dignity of life, approached them and didn't just give them charity and throw them some contaminated blankets and some rotting food to poison them and kill them. They actually taught them how to grow the food in this place, taught them how to grow the squashes, the corn, the pumpkin, and all this kind of stuff. That was all taught to them by the Indians. They taught them how to make houses. They taught them about drinking the water. They saved their life. And when these people that adhere to this ideology, which is fascism, gathered their strength, they massacred them. And the massacre has not stopped. And the other part of this idea is that this is to the slave. This is establishing the American part of the British Empire that still stands today under the control, just like they say, give me the power over the money and I control it. The City of London, which is the royal family, still has control as much over the American money system as it does over Canada, Australia, and the rest of the Commonwealth. There's a reason that Australia, who has no international enemies, has gone to every single war with the United States since World War II. And Canada's right behind them. And there's a reason that those were the only countries, along with other Commonwealth countries and the UK, that went with us to Iraq, which the rest of the world abstained from because it was deemed an illegal, aggressive war under American legal terms. It's called all-out war. And you gotta understand, the ideology that's purported in here is exactly the mentality, it's the psychology, it's the artificial intelligence, and it's true intelligence. It's a lot of creativity, ingenuity, and motivation and self-drive. This is the entire mindset of every president, including Barack Obama. So when people are shocked as to why he can become the status quo that he was so readily speaking against, is because this is his mentality. This is the core of his mentality. The subjugation, the duty of submission to civil government. And it becomes all the more clear to him when he becomes a representative of civil government, when he becomes essentially Machiavelli's the prince. In his mind, he is operating in Plato's, he is operating a democracy at the same time while representing an aristocracy. The best, with the best interest. He only in his mind has the best interest. And therefore, he can usurp what would be called we the people. Because the republic comes first. Trayvon Martin, he could have been my son. 3 days after Trayvon Martin's death. I don't deal with that kind of stuff. I don't deal with domestic issues. 3 weeks later, after a public movement, he could have been my son. To George Zimmerman being acquitted, even at the screaming of Harvard lawyers attesting, screaming and calling for foul because of Angela Corey, the mismanagement of the case that she did intentionally to get George Zimmerman off. The Harvard law professor, Kappa, whatever, came off with justice was served. This is the mentality. There is no revolution to be had. The Constitution, the very structure of what we understand, what we have devoted our entire life to, and what is associated deeply with Christian values, though it has no recollection of ever being part of a Christian anything, democracy is a fallacy. It is the matrix. It is what sustains the American Indian genocide, black subjugation, and the denigration of women as a whole in in our society. We can look wherever the hell we want. Just look at our own society, and it also represents, while he relegates kids to property because we inherit from the father this notion of this contract. Fascism is real, and it's all around us.